Can you, Senator, can you hear us?
I cannot. Well, I heard you then.
It's on, and she still can't hear me. She said.
Oh, I can now. Thank you.
All right. Okay.
And I can hear you too, Representative.
All right, Representative, yes?
I can hear you and I can see you.
Okay, good. It's a good thing.
And Madam Chair, Happy New Year to everyone. And I just wanted to say, Senator McGinn and Representative John Carmichael, thank you for representing Cedric County.
Okay. Well, thank you. We just, Senator McGinn had a motion to accept the minutes of the last meeting, and I seconded it. Does anyone have any changes or corrections or any problem with that before we go to the vote? If not, all those in favor of the minutes being passed, say or motion aye.
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 Any opposed? We have
Yes.
a yes opposed.
Yes.
Who said yes?
Senator Tyson.
Okay. Yes. We have one that has abstained. Am I correct in
Representative Carmichael is not voting this morning. I apologize. I have not had an opportunity to review these minutes in detail.
we have Senator Tyson opposing that? That would mean that we have 5 yeses. Senator Tyson, would you like to address your opposition to the minutes?
I've addressed them privately, and I appreciate all the work that the committee does. So I just would not like my stamp of approval on it. It's fine to pass them.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you very much, Senator. All right, we'll just move on, and we'll welcome Sarah Shipman, Deputy Attorney General from the Attorney General's office. And thank you, Sarah, for being here. Yes, you turn the mic on and then you can be heard.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I am Sarah Shipman, Deputy Attorney General for the Legal Affairs and Government Counsel Division of the Attorney General's office, which is affectionately known as the Logic Division. Among other things, my team of 7 attorneys and 2 staff members are responsible for researching and issuing legal opinions in cooperation with General Schmidt. We review bond and note issuances by all state and local government entities. We serve as general counsel for 29 state agencies, boards, and commissions. We provide public education and training related to the Open Meetings and Open Records Act. And most importantly, for purposes of today's hearing, we are the division within the Attorney General's office that reviews and approves regulations pursuant to KSA 77420. You should all have a copy of my written testimony, which goes into detail about the process. I will summarize that briefly and then try to answer any questions you might have. To begin with, we review all regulations, whether they are temporary or permanent, new, amended, or revocations. In fiscal year 2020, there were 632 reviewed by our office. In 2021, we reviewed 701, and we are on track to review 750 this fiscal year. Our responsibility is limited to the review for legality, and we review amendments as if they are brand new regulations. So we start the process over for legality review of an amended regulation. Just because a regulation has been in place for 2 years or 50 years, it may no longer be appropriately authorized under statute or other law. Our review starts with the authorizing and implementing statutes. So if you look at a regulation at the bottom, you see authorized by and implementing language. And so we look first to see if the legislature has authorized the agency to adopt regulations generally, and specifically the ones that we're talking about. We look next to see what those regulations are purporting to implement. So, for example, the legislature authorized the Attorney General to oversee the Scrap Metal Theft Reduction Act and to adopt regulations to implement that act. When we look at implementation language, we are asking whether the regulation carries out or appropriately explains or interprets the statute and the purpose of the statute that it purports to implement. The example we often use is the legislature has authorized an agency to build a corral for horses. The regulation can't let the agency put llamas in that corral, but it may be able to define by regulation the type of building material used to build that corral, or the number of horses that are put in there, or how they care for the horses that are in there, depending on what the statutory authorization is. So we look to see that they are implementing what the legislature has told them to carry out. We also look at constitutional issues. Is the language of the regulation vague? Does it violate due process? An example of vagueness would be a licensing board is authorized to grant licenses and accept materials in order to grant those licenses. And they adopt a regulation that says to get a license to do X, you have to provide the application, you have to provide your educational transcripts, you have to provide a resume. They can say all of those things. They can't say, or any other documents that the board may wish you to provide, because that's vague, and the regulated community doesn't know what they may be asked to provide. So we look at vagueness issues and due process violations. We also look for conflicts with other statutes or regulations or laws. Examples of those would be violations of the Open Meetings Act or the Open Records Act, or if you have authorized an agency to hold a hearing for certain types of processes, we make sure that those regulations do not violate the Administrative Procedures Act, which you have also passed. And finally, we look at adoptions by reference. The legislature will authorize agencies to adopt federal law. They'll authorize agencies to adopt industry standards in certain circumstances. And so when an agency is seeking to adopt those other laws or standards, we review all of those standards to make sure they comply with Kansas law. An example would be an agency is authorized to adopt a building code, the National Building Code standards. Those may be 800 or 900 pages of building code. The attorneys in the Attorney General's office go through all 800 or 900 pages of those underlying documents and make sure that they are all compliant with Kansas law and or authorized under what the agency is able to do. And if they're not, we work with the agencies on how to modify those standards or statutes. We also review those in light of agency authority. Is everything within that adopted code authorized by the legislature for this agency to do? Sometimes it is, and sometimes it may not be. The process is we get the regulations after they have been approved by the Division of Budget and the Department of Administration. When they come to our office, they are reviewed independently by 2 attorneys who then meet and discuss their opinions as to legality of the regulations. If there aren't any concerns, we can approve the regulation and then it continues through the process. If we have concerns, we meet with the agency and discuss those concerns, whatever they may be, whether it's a vagueness issue or an authorization problem. And we work with an agency and talk through what might be some ways to alter the language or fit within the statutory authority. If that happens, those regulations go back to the agency reworks them, and then they start again with the Division of Budget, and they go back through the Division of Budget for approval, they go back through the Department of Administration for approval, and then they come back to the Attorney General's office for approval. So that's sort of a really short overview of what it is we do. I'm happy to try and answer any questions.
Does anyone have a question that they would like to ask of the Attorney General's office? Yes, Representative Carmichael.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Actually, I may have more than one, but feel free to cut me off and let somebody else get their chance too. The first thing is, as I understand it, your review is to determine the quote-unquote legality.
Yes, correct.
It is not, however, to determine the advisability. Now, as I understand,
Generally, yes.
however, if the regulation says 10 by 10 wow, wow, I may go too far. You may want to.
Madam Chair and Representative Carmichael, what I would say is, yes, our review is to the legality of the regulation. We do not have the authority to disapprove a regulation from a policy perspective, but from a legality perspective. In your example, there might be another statute somewhere else and some other body of law that would allow us to say that's too many horses, but it would be because there was another statutory or other law.
So if we see the Attorney General's stamp on a proposed regulation that arrives here in the committee, I think then we can assume that the logic and has found applies laws as well as
I
Madam
would
Chair,
put,
Yes, Senator Godot, Faust Godot.
for this Representative Newland, I don't know if others online are having the same problem, but I'm only picking up a very little about what Representative Carmichael is saying.
well, it's your lucky day.
Just be grateful for small blessings. Maybe
No.
the representative,
I'm very
maybe
interested to hear what
the
he
representative
says.
would take off his mask when he speaks next year.
And with the chair's permission, I would prefer to wear a mask. As you know, there's a pandemic in progress, and the CDC recommends that we wear masks. Can you hear me now, with the chair's permission? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you better. Thank you.
Okay. The nature of my question was, we see the stamp. Does that mean that the Attorney General's office has reviewed the proposed regulation for legality and determined that it does in fact comply with the law and the statutory authority, or does that mean something different?
so the stamp is effective as of the day that it is stamped, but I would also direct you to the language in my written testimony that talks about the sheer number of volume, and there have been occasions where after the fact, we have reviewed something for legality and come to a different opinion. But you can assume that if our stamp is on it as of that day, we had approved it as to legality to the best of our ability, given
Certainly. And
the
I want to
circumstances.
address paragraph 3 of your report here in a moment. Post facto determination before we go to that, I get these letters say for the reasons discussed. Says we've approved. Does anyone, as a usual matter, does anyone outside the logic division at the Attorney General's office review the regulation before that letter goes out? Because I never see the Attorney General's a lot of things to do in life. Probably not.
Typically, it is confined to the attorneys within the logic division. Occasionally, if there is a disagreement or you have 7 lawyers in a room, you might have 7 different opinions. So there have been times that it may have gone beyond the logic division, but as a general rule, it is reviewed by 2 attorneys in the logic division and potentially other attorneys within the logic division.
So the members of this committee should not assume that just because the AG's stamp is on a proposed regulation, that the Attorney General has actually laid his or her eyes on the.
That would be a fair statement.
Now, with the chair's permission, I would like January. That is after regulation. I can imagine this happening in 2 possible instances. One is regulation is approved by the Attorney General's office in 1860. And here we are 60 years later. The legislature has in the interim passed other laws.
That would certainly be one, yes.
And then there are other instances where, for example, you receive a request for an Attorney General's opinion and more in-depth research done, and lawyers realize perhaps Bob Stephen years ago.
Correct.
Might not have been correct. So, you may, in essence, first turn out an opinion. Might say that that regulation is not consistent. You can help.
That would certainly be another instance if we had occasion to re-opine on a regulation. I wouldn't want to speculate as to all of the potential instances that this might come into play, but
But when you re-opine, if you will, based upon further research or more in-depth research, or perhaps even intervening court decisions, you don't revoke the regulation by removing your stamp because it's already been promulgated.
if a regulation has gone completely through the process,
I'm talking about the 35-year-old regulation from Bob Steffen's time as AG.
certainly. So any regulation that has gone completely through the process and been finally formally adopted by the agency and is viewed as Kansas law cannot be revoked by operation of an Attorney General's opinion, because that is exactly what we are offering, is an opinion. So just as it would be the same for a statute. If we had occasion to opine on a statute 25 years later, our opinion would not revoke a statute.
Final area, hopefully briefly, Madam Chair, if I might. We had some proposals discussed last session, maybe the session before, change the order to application. Folks from division of budget said we are reviewing office, office, eyes. From your perspective, that interfere with your work, change the so that the division of budget not reviews tax and regulations office advised in which case comment on whether that's a good idea, bad idea.
My answer to that, Representative, would be that that is a policy decision for the legislature as to what order you would like these regulations reviewed at, whether it's from an economic standpoint first or from a legal standpoint first. And so our review would remain the same regardless of the order.
And I recognize that as a policy decision for the legislature to make. We guard our legislative prerogatives quite carefully around here. But from a practical standpoint, in the logic division, if we change the order, that increase your workload, decrease your observation, have any effect for us? For example, I don't think you go back and financially. You know?
What I can say is our review would remain the same regardless of what order it went through. However, we do review the economic impact statements if for no other reason than they are the agency's explanation of what they are doing and they give us some background information. But it wouldn't change what we are looking for or how we review if we reviewed at some other point in the process.
Just I hate for the division of the budget to go through the whole process and then have to start over after the AG's office has done their review. The final thing that you raise that cause.
Can you hold that question?
Oh, certainly.
Someone else ask a question. Senator Warren.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and don't mean to interrupt, but thank you for the opportunity to ask a few quick questions. Thank you for appearing today. I apologize, Madam Chair, for my lateness in arriving. I was part of a legislative panel back in my home district, talking with the community there and answering questions. And I apologize I wasn't present for the entire presentation. Tried to follow online as I drove in, but that's not always easy to do, listen and do all that. So while being safe. My question is, when the Office of Attorney General stamps the approval on a rule or regulation, that is no statement on the policy that the legislature has enacted, whether the Attorney General's office approves of the policy, disapproves, wants it changed, amended. Am I correct in that?
That is correct.
It's just merely as you had or is set forth in the January 5th, 2022 letter, kind of the 6 areas of inquiry, whether legally it is sound as a rule and regulation. Is that correct?
That is correct. We look at the legality of the regulation as it relates to Kansas law, and we do not offer an opinion as to the statute or the policy position of the agency.
And we do get those letters from the Office of Attorney General saying that the office has reviewed the particular rule or regulation and it's found to meet with approval, and here's our letter from the office stating so. Sometimes it's not approved, and recall for me, if you will, and help the public to understand as well, does the office then state the reason that the approval is withheld? Is it because the adoption process wasn't followed, or is it have some constitutional question to it or conflict with other? Do you give a reason is what I'm asking?
Thank you, Madam Chair and Senator Warren. We meet with the agents. If we do not approve a regulation, we have meetings with the agency and we discuss with them the reason that we are not able to approve that regulation. And then they can go back and address those issues of concern. But we do not offer that as a written communication, either to the agency or to anybody else. It's a sit-down meeting where we discuss the regulations and our concerns.
With the particular agency, and then you leave it to the agency to determine what to do after that conversation?
Correct. They would, if they wanted to continue the process, they would have to make those corrections or changes and then go back through Division of Budget, Department of Administration, and come back to the Attorney General's office again.
One more follow-up question, if I may, Madam Chair, to follow up on Representative Carmichael's line of inquiry. Given that sometimes you follow up with the agency or the department who has proposed the rule or reg, and then they have to go back to those other departments, would it be helpful to have the Office of Attorney General review it earlier in the process, or it's merely a legislative policy decision for us to determine?
There's kind of I'm hesitating because they're kind of two different questions there. We do not do a pre-review for an agency. We will not look at an agency's regulation until it has gone through the entire process. So it has to have been through Division of Budget and Department of Administration. We don't look at something that's a draft. So that's sort of one answer to your question. I don't know that it would, I honestly don't think that it would impact our process at all to change the order that it is reviewed, other than I would say that the Department of Administration review for style and grammar is important and helps us know that it's in really good shape by the time it gets to us. The Department of Administration does a very nice job of helping agencies draft grammatically correct language.
Thank
So that
you.
we're looking at something that is easy to read, and we're looking only for legality then.
Thank you. Appreciate that, and appreciate the kind of early promotion to chair of the committee. As stated in the letter here, it's a little bit premature. I think on Monday is when we. But thank you for the opportunity.
I apologize. I caught that yesterday, and
No.
I apologize.
As long as Madam Chair is okay with it, then,
I'm okay with it. I know that Sarah was just getting me out of the way so she could get to you. That's all right. Representative Carmichael, I'm sorry I interrupted you. I just wanted to make sure someone else had a chance.
Certainly, and I'm sorry I took a little longer than I should. To go back to where we left off, we were talking about the financial impact statements, and I want to make sure that we don't leave here with the idea that you folks are reviewing the financial impact statements to determine whether or not the statement itself complies with the law, because we have a lot of controversy. Sometimes it seems there's an incentive for agencies cost the regulation might be less than statute. Well, office trying to figure out
Madam Chair and Representative Carmichael, we do not review the legality or any of the statements in that economic impact statement for anything other than background reading as we are getting ready to review the regulations.
Okay, so if the agency is understating the cost of a proposed regulation, it's really not within the scope of your authority or your expertise to figure out whether it's true or not.
That does not go to the legality of the regulation they are
Excellent.
attempting to promulgate.
The final thing that I would like to ask, with the chair's permission, let's assume not the Attorney General today, but some Attorney General someday in the future has a black heart and really wants to exercise policy and wants to disprove that because it's black-hearted policy. Is there any avenue
Madam Chair and Representative Carmichael, I would have to, I don't know that I can answer that on my feet as I stand here today.
I can't either. I think I know what the answer is, but rather than me requesting Attorney General's opinion on the point, with the chair's permission, would you favor us with just a supplemental answer at a later time to that question? Because if we start revising these rules, that's if you can't, that's fine. I'll request an AG's.
What I can commit to today is going back and looking into the issue and continuing the conversation.
Okay, feel free to give me a call. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Is there anyone else that has a question or comment? Senator Warren.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One last question or two, if I might. If the Attorney General withholds approval and doesn't stamp approval, what then happens in the process for a rule and regulation? Does it come to this committee? Does it move on? What happens to it?
Madam Chair and Senator Warren, I don't have all the statutes in front of me, but my understanding of the process is the Secretary of State's office cannot publish the proposed regulation for public comment until it has received all 3 stamps. So it would put a stop to the process until such time as we determined what next steps could be, based on Representative Carmichael's questions, I guess. We reviewed 701 regulations last year, and I would have to look at how many were published. But my guess is when an agency submits an entire stack of regulations, there are typically 1 or 2 that probably have something of concern. A common one is one that I addressed, that when an agency is asking for in regulation a list of things from the regulated community, and then they add language in there that says, or any such other matters as the board may request. So we find that kind of language frequently. So it's not something that, you know, shuts everything down and stops the process. But I would say that we disapprove regulations on a regular basis. Correct. Correct.
You're welcome. Are there any other questions? I don't see any hands up. Thank you, Ms. Shipman. I appreciate your coming, and then we'll just look forward to hearing from you on some of your other answers.
Thank you.
Perhaps. Thank you for
the
being here.
opportunity.
I know you're really busy. Appreciate it. All right, we'll move on to the Kansas Department of Health and Environment, Division of Public Health, Bureau of Community Health Systems. We have James Allmeyer. I'm not even going to guess the names. So if you would introduce yourself when you get on. We have quite a few people from KDHE appearing via WebEx. Thank you, people, for all of you for being here.
Hello, test, can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. My name is James Uhlmeyer. Very close. I'm with KDHE, and I will be speaking on the
We're
large
having
package
a little
of
bit of trouble
regulations.
hearing you. Can you turn up your microphone just a little bit, maybe, or get closer to your microphone? Maybe that'll be better.
I will be presenting on the large package of regulations that we have going through today. There are many to name, but largely they fall into a few categories. The regulated community in
Yes,
Kansas.
sir.
Hello? Yes?
We're having trouble understanding you, sir. I wonder if you could get to a different computer or different microphone. I apologize. This is a kind of a technical subject. We'd kind of like to understand the
Yes.
beginning part.
Okay. If I move to another computer, it'll take a minute. Is
Okay,
that all right?
that's fine. We can wait. Is there someone else that would like to get started?
I am going to be doing the main bulk of the presentations today.
It's the microphone, I think. There's something we're just not.
Madam
You
Chair,
can.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Senator.
couldn't he just talk louder?
Perhaps.
Test, test. Can you hear me now?
Not really.
Not really.
I'll tell you what, you get this figured out, sir, and I'll just have the Board of Nursing come up and speak to us while you figure out how to.
All right. Thank you.
All right, thank you, sir. And I'm going to thank, is it Carol Moreland, Executive Administrator of the Board of Nursing? Thank you for being here and thank you for stepping in while we're trying to hear people better. This has been we've got a gremlin in the system, so thanks for being here.
No problem. Good morning, Madam Chair and committee members. My name is Carol Moreland. I'm the administrator for the Kansas State Board of Nursing. I'm here today to present proposed changes to 2 regulations from our Nurse Practice Act that deal with the licensure of practical nursing, nurses, professional nurses, and advanced practice registered nurses. These proposed changes, for the most part, are in response to House Bill 2066 that was passed at the last session. Before I overview the proposed changes, I just wanted to kind of mention something about our economic impact. You know, the reason for House Bill 2066, it's my understanding the main reason was expedited licensing. And so there were timelines given in there, like 15 days for military service members or spouse and 45 days for all other applicants, that the licensing board had to issue a license once they had the completed application. And I just wanted to briefly touch a little bit that we license them much faster than that. So that is why you didn't see probably a lot of economic impact to our agency, because we're not going to have to hire new staff or anything for this to happen. Actually, one of our performance metrics is how fast we license after we have a completed application. And our benchmark is to do it within 3 days. And the last 3 years, we've met that 100% of the time. So I have no doubt that they will be licensed within the timeline that is in there without any additional staff or anything like that. And then I just also wanted to point out, we may be a little bit different than some of the licensing boards in the fact that we are part of the Nurse Licensure Compact. So these changes in House Bill 2066 would not apply to multi-state licenses that are issued through the Nurse Licensure Compact, because they would be, a couple of them would be in violation of the rules of the Nurse Licensure Compact. We are not allowed to issue a multi-state license until we have a criminal background report back. And one of the changes for single state would be through House Bill 2066. If we had all the other documentation, we could not hold up licensing someone just because we didn't have the criminal background report back from the KBI. Okay, so that would be a change for us for single state. Okay, I know it gets a little confusing here, but I just kind of wanted to make sure that you were aware of that. So I think, you know, the economic impact could be that there may be some that we could get licensed a little bit faster, and because of that fact that we would not be waiting on a criminal background report. So that means that they would be able to work faster, which would help the employers, definitely, with what we're going through right now. Okay, just to kind of go through these two, like I said, most of the changes have to do with House Bill 2066. However, we did clean up some language, as we always do when we look at a regulation. And then we also added to each of these that the applicant shall be fingerprinted and submit to a state and national criminal history record check. That was already in statute. It had just never actually got put into rules and regs. So now that we did this, we decided to put it into both of these, just to kind of make that very clear. And then another change is that the examination fee for the RNs and the LPNs would be paid to as directed by the National Council of State Boards of Nursing. It is a national licensure test. It is not one that we do makeup or anything like that. National Council of State Boards of Nursing oversees that. So actually that examination fee is paid as they direct, not actually to us. Okay. And then the other part that we added is just within 180 days after we receive the application, that the applicant has to submit proof that all qualifications have been met. If they do not meet it within 180 days, the application shall be deemed abandoned and closed. We actually have this in another regulation that speaks to just the expiration date of the applications. So we put it in here hoping that we can get rid of the other regulation, and it will actually be in a regulation that deals with licensure and applications and stuff like that. So then, and I'm looking at 60-3-101, I apologize. Page 3 is actually what starts the content from House Bill 2066. It starts with the verification that will provide it upon their request and their payment. And then endorsement, we actually, this is new. We made a definition of active practice because House Bill 2066 does use the term active practice. So we felt like that needed to be defined here. And then similar scope of practice, again, that language was in House Bill 2066. We didn't actually have it, so we decided that it should be included in here. And then what we don't have available right now is the temporary emergency license. So that would be new. And, you know, it's a great idea. And it will be very helpful during a pandemic. I will just leave it at that. But it
Madam
does.
Chair. Madam Chair.
Yes,
Senator Falscudo, if I could ask, can you give an example of what some of the emergency licensures might be, why they might be requested?
Right. Actually, when the pandemic started, we received a lot of questions about whether they could get a temporary emergency license to practice during that state of emergency that had been declared. We didn't really have any kind of emergency license or anything at that point in time. I think that's when we would see it mostly. But we just have to make sure that they meet some qualifications for us to be able to give that to them. That's the only time that I see that it would be used is in an emergency situation, a state of disaster, something along that line, because we actually could get that going much faster than some of the other stuff that they would have to complete for an actual license. And the temporary emergency license then would be during that state of emergency.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Oh, yes, you're welcome, Senator. Yes, Jenna.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to clarify that the state of emergency is not determined by the agency, but it will require, according to the legislature.
Excellent. Thank you for adding that. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And that's actually in here. It kind of talks about during the state of emergency declared by the legislature. So yes, that is not something that we can just do on our own here, determine whether there's an emergency or not. But we did talk about what are the qualifications that they would have to meet, both for the RN and for the LPN, because it was really felt like there needed to be some qualifications that would have to be met. And those are basically that they're currently licensed or they have been licensed within the last 5 years by another state licensing agency preceding the application date, that they've passed a course in CPR, that they have a current CPR certificate, and then that they have the skills required to practice, like as a registered professional nurse or an LPN during this state of emergency that's been declared by the legislature. So that's basically an overview of the changes for 60-3-101, because that deals with the LPNs and the RNs. You just want me to go ahead to the next one,
Yes.
or, okay.
Unless we have questions, you may go ahead.
Okay, 60-11-103 is basically the licensure regulation for advanced practice. So you're going to see a lot of the same things that were put in here about the fingerprinting, about the expiration, within 180 days. And then we kind of clarified and added some headings on here to kind of, I think, clarify it. Like under B, small b is licensure in the roles of clinical nurse specialist, nurse anesthetist, nurse midwife, and nurse practitioner. So that someone knows if they're looking for information about that, they could go underneath that and stuff like that. So we added that, and licensure in the roles of clinical nurse specialist and nurse practitioner, licensure in the role of a nurse anesthetist, licensure in the role of a nurse midwife, and then national nursing certification. We added that. We added headings about some of the education that all of the 4 roles have to have as far as advanced pharmacology education requirement. We didn't change the education requirements at all. We just added the heading to kind of help if someone's just looking at this. And then the same thing for refresher course. We didn't change, how they have to get a refresher course or anything like that. It just kind of cleaned up the bill a little bit. And so on page 5 of 60-11-103 is where we start the information about House Bill 2066. And you'll see it looks very, very similar to what we had in the other one. We did say, as far as similar scope of practice, that we do have our scope of practice defined in our statutes. So they would have to look back at that and be able to tell us that they had a similar scope of practice. And then we also defined active practice, and it's just the same definition that we had in the other one. And then we talked about temporary emergency license, because again, they would be able to get this in a state of emergency. So they would have to be licensed as an RN also, because we do require an advanced practice nurse to have an RN license also. And we didn't change that. A lot of the states require that, so we're really not much different there. So that's kind of an overview of the changes.
All right, are there any questions or comments? Senator Warren.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for appearing today in committee and your testimony. Scope of practice is defined in statute, and it's referred here in the regulation. Tell me again what page to look at for that.
Are you talking about scope of practice for advanced practice?
Yes,
60-11-103.
Page 3, yes, 60 dash.
That actually is addressed on page 5 of this regulation under L1. The applicant shall determine similar scope of practice as defined in. And they should be able to tell us what their scope of practice has been. If they've been working as a nurse practitioner, if they've been working as a clinical nurse specialist. But we do have those defined, so we didn't repeat them.
And then the same thing looking back at KR 60-3-101, when we're talking about similar scope of practice there on page 3, it's as defined in statute. So nothing here changes scope of practice.
No, we were just kind of defining that similar scope of practice language that was in House Bill 2066 so that it would be maybe a little bit more clear.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right. Are there any other questions? Representative Carmichael.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think this relates to Senator Warren's question. At the very end of your testimony, you made reference to, I think it was ARN, Advanced Registered Nurse Practitioners and a requirement that they be an RN.
Mhm.
Can you just explain that to me? Because I've always presumed.
You do. You are correct that they have to be. But we, instead of just saying that they have a license as an APRN, they have to, in Kansas, they also have to keep their RN license. And I will just tell you, there's been a few times during the pandemic that some of the healthcare facilities in the nursing shortage that we're dealing with right now have wanted to take an APRN and work them as an RN. Okay, if they didn't have an RN license, they wouldn't be able to do that. So the fact that they have an RN license, a current RN license, they can do that. It's a little tricky for them because they have a higher level of knowledge and skills. However, there's nothing that stops them from doing that. But if they didn't have that RN license, they wouldn't be able to. We've always just required that they have an RN license in addition to their APRN license. But you are correct. It's a requirement for APRN nursing programs that they have to have an active RN license.
And I may have misspoke. It's APRN, Advanced Practice Registered Nurse.
Right. That was a change a few years ago. It used to be ARNP.
Yeah, ARNP was what rolled off my tongue from years of that. Okay, so.
No, it was in the past, yeah.
Thank you for correcting my error. Thank you,
No,
Madam Chair.
that's fine.
Okay. Are there any other questions? If not, thank you very much, Kathy, for being here. I appreciate it, and we'll get in touch with you if you have any other further questions. Thank you. So are we ready to go back to the KDHE's?
Hi, James Uhlmeyer is on his way over to do it in person. So he started heading over from the KDHE building.
He's here. Thank you very much, Kim. Thank you. Thank you for coming over. I know you really didn't want to, but I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. My name is James Uhlmeyer. I am with KDHE, in charge of regs. As some of you may know, the radiation program operates under a unique agreement with the Federal Nuclear Regulatory Commission because there are a lot of interstate things present with radioactive materials. Under the NRC Kansas agreement, the state of Kansas is required to have radioactive materials licensing compatible with the NRC. The amount of compatibility can vary by regulation. Some are required to be essentially identical, some just a faithful interpretation, and some not required to be identical at all. These proposed amendments will enable the state to retain agreement state authority by meeting the NRC requirements for compatibility. This approach is identical to the practice of contiguous states which also have agreement state status with the NRC. Note that Missouri is not an agreement state and is under direct NRC control. Kansas has operated as an agreement state since 1965, still going strong. The regulated community in Kansas includes over 260 licensees across a variety of fields, from hospitals to manufacturing to research to the oil and gas industry. KSA 48-1601 requires that the state provide for compatibility with the standards and regulatory programs of the federal government. This regulation package includes provisions that make corrections to areas of non-compatibility identified by the NRC in current regulations and brings Kansas into compatibility. In this package, these changes fall into 5 broad categories. First, several definitions have been created or slightly altered to maintain their original meaning and stay in harmony with other states as regulatory language evolves. Some wording has also been altered to make the regulations more readable and in keeping with current Kansas standards. 2, updates were made to general licensure requirements to bring these requirements in line with federal standards. 3, Kansas has been granted authority by the NRC, Nuclear Regulatory Commission, to review sealed source designs, and the state required additional regulations to govern that project. 4, transportation requirements were updated to match with modern interstate requirements. And 5, alterations were made to medical requirements to remain compatible with new NRC regulatory requirements, and that is both for materials and for X-rays. The general license requirements cover an update to federal requirements for static elimination devices and ion-generating tubes, products containing tritium, krypton-85, and promethium-147. They also cover updates for luminous safety devices for aircraft and federal testing requirements for products containing americium-241 or radium-226. Medical requirements have also been updated for ophthalmic physicists and associate radiation safety officers. Testing requirements have also been updated for technetium-99 generators that require elution, or Tech-99. Again, those X-ray regulations were also updated. Newly regulated modalities were included, such as E-brachytherapy, intensity-modulated radiation therapy simulation systems, and a forward-looking section on streamlining new uses in this rapidly evolving field. Additional minor changes were included, such as updating terminology and standardizing timeframes. If you'd like, I can go over a brief summary of each regulation as it's changed and the exact changes made to them.
Oh, wow, that would be great. I'm just afraid that we don't have enough time. No, I'm just giving you I appreciate your coming over here because it was confusing enough to look at. Did anyone have a question?
It's a hefty packet.
Yes. Well, the only questions I had is that clearly it's over a large group of area, like you said, but does this also include when you go to nuclear medicine at the hospital, you have to swallow something for your thyroid or things like this. So everyone's got an eye on them. Is that correct?
Yes, specifically those iodine pills, iodine 131.
Okay. All right. Thank you for coming over, and I know that you, like I said, you didn't really want to, but I appreciate it. We can hear you so much better over here. Are there any other questions? Are there any other questions? Well, you got off the hot seat pretty quick. So thank you very much for coming over and helping us with that.
Thank you.
Now we have the Kansas Department of Health and Environment Division of Environment, Bureau of Water. Is that correct? Or is someone on WebEx for that?
Yes,
Yes.
Madam Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, so far.
I'm hoping I don't have to run over there across the street, but we'll try this. So thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is William Carr. I'm the Assistant Director for the Bureau of Water at KDHE. I also have on standby Dane Boring, who's the Policy Planning and Standards Unit Chief. Dane should be able to answer any technical questions that I get stumped by. So we're here today to present proposed changes to the Kansas Water Quality Standards found in KAR 28-16-28B, 2816-28E through 2816-28H. In general, these regulations set standards for controlling pollution in Kansas surface waters to ensure they achieve a retained water quality needed for their designated uses. KDHE regularly reviews and updates water quality standards through a federally required process every 3 years. Most of the changes to the regulations we're proposing today are grammatical language revisions and incorporating updated implementation documents by reference. Of course, the implementation documents contain the more technical implementation details of the program. If the committee's ready, I can go through each regulation, starting with 2816-28B.
Does anyone have a question before we get started? Please feel free to go ahead and get into whatever detail you think is necessary. I don't know if we need a lot of detail, so thank you, sir.
I will be very brief here. So in this regulation, it's definitions about water quality standards. It said most of the changes are grammatical. Non-grammatical change is really to revise the date to accommodate the current version of the implementation procedures. which is adopted by reference. Any question about the definitions or the implementation procedures document?
I think we're fine. You may go ahead.
Okay. Moving on to 2816 28E. This regulation outlines how surface water quality is developed, describes general criteria and numeric criteria, how the criteria is associated with the designated uses of the surface waters. Again, mostly grammatical changes. There's a non-grammatical change found in subsection C3, which removes language denoting requirements for federal regulations, which really isn't appropriate to be in the Kansas regulations. Next non-grammatical change is in subsection D3, which of course points out the implementation procedures document being adopted by reference. And the final non-grammatical change in subsection E updates the current version of the numeric criteria document that's adopted by reference. Any questions about those changes or the numeric criteria?
We actually have a question. Senator Warren.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your testimony. Regarding 28E, the stricken language in subsection 3 or C3. So it looks like what was stricken there was that each digression shall be assessed by the secretary. So the proposal in this regulation is to no longer have the secretary review or assess each digression. Am I reading that correctly?
Senator, could you tell us what page you're talking about?
Sure. It is on page 3 of 28-16-28E. The bottom
Yes,
of page 3.
Okay, thank you.
Right. That is the section where it really explains the federal requirements, which even EPA questioned why they were in the Kansas regulations. And so we removed those from the Kansas regulations, although it explains the federal requirements, but there's no need for that to be in the Kansas regulations. So that, I mean, yeah, we will still follow those, but that's a federal requirement.
When you get over there and y'all talk, call me back and I'm gonna go back when I get off this Zoom meeting. I'm gonna go back to my email.
Senator Faust-Godot, we can hear. You might want to mute your audio. We're hearing your telephone conversation.
So the removal is removing one more piece of regulation.
It doesn't need to be in the Kansas regulations. It's already
covered in the federal.
It's covered in the federal regulations.
So it's redundant.
Correct.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. You may continue.
Okay, moving to 2816-28F. This describes the administration of water quality standards. Again, the non-grammatical changes start in subsection C. This increased the time allowed for compliance schedules and discharge permits. It increases from the current 3 years to 5 years beyond the permit issue date. Also in this subsection, it allows for the compliance schedules to extend beyond the permit expiration dates. These are flexibilities that will be given to the regulated entities to help them comply with permit requirements. Also in subsection D, we rearranged some paragraphs to present them in more logical order. Any questions about this regulation?
Senator Warren has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Regarding the change on page 1 of 28F, subsection C1 at the bottom of page 1 there.
Yes.
You're changing, the proposed regulation is to change the let's see, the length of the permit from 3 to 5 years, or
No,
explain?
it's not the permit length. The permit is 5 years. It's if they are out of compliance, then we will add a schedule of compliance into that permit. Currently, that schedule of compliance can only go out 3 years, and they have to have the problem fixed. What this will do is change it to increase it that it can go out for 5 years for the whole permit length. And furthermore, it would allow that compliance schedule to extend beyond the permit expiration date. So we're not changing the permit length, it's the compliance schedule within that permit.
Thank you for that explanation. To make sure that I'm understanding it, does the change from 3 to 5 years mean you can be out of compliance now for 5 years instead of 3, or you have 5 years instead of 3 to get back into compliance, or?
Right. The schedule of compliance is determined. It's way KDHE and the regulated entity come to terms with, okay, this is what's wrong, and it might take a new facility. It might take a rehab of a facility that, it takes a year to design, takes another year to construct, and then, fine tuning the operation. So we put a schedule of compliance that says, okay, this entity will have this done by this date, this date, this date, and that schedule can go out to 3 years. So yeah, as far as the compliance go, it's usually because they have too high of a level of a pollutant they're discharging. But once they agree to that schedule of compliance to say that we will no longer discharge at this level by X date, they're on the path to compliance there. So.
And KDHE has determined that this is a good change for Kansas from 3 to 5 years?
It does present some flexibility. You've got to understand with a lot of the wastewater treatment facilities and municipalities, they have several things coming at them at the same time. This helps them to plan them at the same time. If they have a stormwater problem they have to correct, it gets very expensive. They have a wastewater problem they have to correct, it gets very expensive, time consuming. They have a drinking water problem they have to correct. All those 3 things happen at the same time. They really need a longer period of time to get them all fixed in. And so this builds some flexibility for us to allow them to do more of an integrated planning to correct all their issues.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes. Are there any other questions? You may continue. You have anything else at this point?
Okay, just 2 more. 2816 28G changes to regulation. It just updates the reference document for the designated use of Kansas surface waters. Any questions about that? It's pretty simple. And then finally, the same thing, regulation 2816 28H updates the surface water quality standards variance register. Yes. And that's really the only change in that one. I believe that's it.
Okay. Are there any questions? Senator Warren.
I can't hear you. I can see you talking now, but I can't hear anything.
Sorry, I thought I pushed the button. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now, yes.
Thank you. Quick question for research regarding 28-16-28F C1. When we're referring to the KSA 65-165, was it by statute that the 3 years was originally determined, or was that always in rules and regulations?
That was in, I'm not sure. I think that was in rules and regulations. It
Would have
stems
had to
from,
be, because otherwise we'd have had to legislatively
change
change the
it here.
policy.
Yes. It comes from what really gave us the ability to change that is in the federal law, federal regulations. It indicates those compliance schedules need to be done as soon as possible, which is really vague. So we thought we needed to extend some of that flexibility for cases that needed more time to come up with a solution to the problem.
You're welcome. Are there any other questions? If not, William, Mr. Carr, thank you so much for being here at our meeting. Did you have anything else for us today?
No, that's it for me. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you very, very much. That moves us on to our committee discussion and comments on proposed rules and regs. Does anyone have any comments? Or today is a quiet meeting. I should be very quiet. I shouldn't even say that. I should knock on wood because all of a sudden we'll bring in everyone. Yes. That's right. That's right. Yes.
Jill Shelley with Legislative Research. So just to clarify, the report would read that the committee had no comments on the other side.
Is that correct for everyone? Everyone on WebEx okay with that?
Yes.
Yes.
Madam Chair.
Okay. Yes. Yes, Senator.
Thank you. I would like to thank you and staff for all your work. This is one of the most difficult committees and takes much more work than people realize. So thank you very much.
Thank you for the comment. I appreciate that. And special thanks to Jill and John and Jenna and Jordan and everybody here that just make sure that we run fairly smoothly, even if we don't have microphones that work in the room. So this is my last as chair this year. So welcome, new chair, Senator Warren. And then I'll call this meeting adjourned. And just before I adjourn the meeting, I wanted to remind Senator Warren that we have a state rules and regs meeting next. So, all right. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you, staff.
Thank you, Madam
everyone
Chair.
on WebEx.
Thank you all.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Good morning. I will call the meeting of the State Rules and Regulations Board to order. I will note that Mary Greb Hall with Department of Administration is joining us via WebEx. And in the room, we have Clay Barker with the Secretary of State's office. We have Representative Wassinger. We have Senator Warren. We have Representative Carmichael, and I am Sarah Shipman. The first item of business is the approval of the August 25th, 2021 meeting minutes. You all should have received a copy of those minutes. I would entertain a motion to approve those.
Madam Chair, I move that we approve the minutes as published.
And I second that.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. The minutes are approved. The next item on the agenda is the consideration of permanent rules and regulations filed in 2021 for publication in the official 2022 Kansas Administrative Regulations volumes or supplements. And we have two different sets that we need to approve. The first is the general rules and regulations, and the second is for the State Board of Education. I would entertain a motion for either of those.
Madam Chair, I make a motion. I move that in accordance with KSA 77-423 and 77-428, all rules and regulations which were regularly adopted and filed in the Office of the Secretary of State during 2021, other than temporary rules and regulations, be published in the official 2020 Kansas Administrative Regulations volumes or supplement. Okay. And I correct my motion in the official 2022 Kansas Administrative Regulations volumes or supplement.
Thank you. Do I hear a second? Second, Representative Wassinger. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries.
Madam Chair, I have a second motion. I move that the Secretary of State publish the rules and regulations of the State Board of Education adopted pursuant to the constitutional authority of the board and filed during the year 2021 as part of the official 2022 Administrative Regulations volume.
Second. None. All in favor signify by saying aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Are there any matters that members of the board bring forward? State rules and regulations board, we do have some regulations that are in. So as soon